today's subject is on, but they signed a waiver. We want to talk about liability waivers. And like I said, apparently this subject has touched a nerve because we have a ton of people who've signed in and signed up for this course. So let's dive right in and talk about this important thing. First of all, I want to give a little disclaimer. First off, I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice, and you should always seek legal advice from your legal counsel. So always consult with your attorney on any risk decision that you make. But I am a risk manager, and I think it's a good idea to listen to risk managers because we speak about the practical matters. We may not speak specifically about legal, but we talk about what's practical and what works. And so that's the angle that I'm coming from. I encourage you highly to speak with your legal counsel, talk about how this stuff impacts you and what is the best way to protect your organizations from the various risks that you face out there. So there's a disclaimer there. And I'm going to start out and say liability sucks. Now I've got a high school English teacher who is rolling over in her grave right now, Mrs. Roylance. Boy, she didn't like me to use the word suck, and she talked to me about that a few times. So sorry. But liability sucks, and so do waivers. So I'll start out with that, and we'll talk a little more in detail as we get along there. But first of all, I want to talk about liability and what it really is, how we get ourselves into trouble. A lot of us out there worry about liability, but we may not know really what it is or what it means to our organization. So let's just talk about some basics of liability as we dive in. Liability is really the state of being responsible of something, especially in a legal standpoint. To be found negligent, you need to owe somebody a duty. You need to breach that duty, and that person needs to be injured as the proximal cause of that action that we took. So I've said a couple of things there. First of all, I said we have to have a duty. We have to owe somebody a legal obligation, a reasonable standard of care. And so as we talk about that, what could fall into that? Well, a reasonable standard of care might be sidewalks. If we install a sidewalk in our cities, we owe the public a standard of reasonable care that sidewalk will be in reasonably good condition. And there are standards around that. The standard of care is any uplift on that sidewalk that's greater than a quarter inch probably puts us outside of what is reasonable. Who do we owe a duty to? Well, it depends on what we're doing. Generally, we're going to owe a duty to invitees. We ask people to come to our areas. Let's say we have a park. We invite the public to come out and enjoy using our parks, our playgrounds. Well, if we invite them, even if we don't charge them money, we owe them an obligation, a duty to provide reasonable care in what we're doing. Our playgrounds need to be safe. Our parks need to be in a condition that won't cause them injury. If people pay us money, we owe them more of a duty, right? If they pay to use our facilities, then that obligation goes up a little bit more. But what about trespassers? If somebody illegally comes onto our property, do I owe them a duty to provide a safe area for them? Well, yeah, to a certain extent I do, particularly when it comes to an attractive nuisance, and particularly when it comes to minors. If I have an open piece of land that maybe somebody donated to our organization, or we purchased it with the idea of developing it in the future, and there's a big pile of concrete out there with rebar sticking out of it. Well, if I don't exercise a reasonable standard of care of cleaning that up or restricting access to that, and somebody sneaks in there, even if it's illegal, and they get injured, if I created an attractive nuisance, I could end up being liable for injury to that person, particularly when youth are involved. All right. So what is our standard of care? Well, there are a number of things that can develop the standard of care. It could be law. It could be law that says this is what is expected of you. So as you move from place to place, you've got your car with all of your stuff piled on top. Well, there is a law that says that your loads need to be adequately secured. And if they fall off and impact somebody, well, I'm probably liable for the damages that I caused because of that. Other things could be like consensus standard, ANSI standard. There's no law that says I have to follow an ANSI standard. But everybody got together and came up with a consensus standard and says, this is how we're going to do things. And if I breach that standard of care, well, then I can probably be found guilty of negligence. Okay. All right. So what is the standard of care? I need to evaluate what we're doing, our facilities, the activities that we're doing, evaluate that against what standards are out there, and then make a plan, write it down. Communicate that with our organization. This is what we have to do to meet our standard of care, and then take appropriate actions. Well, if we fail on that, we can be sued. Now, some of you out there say, hold on, wait, you can't sue the government. We're the government. We have governmental immunity. We're protected from all of these things. And you know what? It says as much in state code. Here are the codes. No person may make a claim against or recover from any of the following entities for personal injury or property damage resulting from any of the inherent risks of participating in a recreational activity, a county, municipality, or local district. It says right there, you can't recover or even make a claim against a county, a municipality, or local district. Well, if you've been around any amount of time, you know that's probably just wishful thinking that we could make that stick. Well, here's another state code. Says, except as may be otherwise provided in this chapter, each governmental entity and each employee of a governmental entity are immune from suit for any injury that results from the exercise of a governmental function. Okay, so number one, what's a governmental function? What is it that is purely a governmental function? And that becomes really difficult. There have been cases in which they've looked at collecting sewer. Well, that's not a governmental function. Somebody else could do that. Collecting garbage, law enforcement in certain cases. So it's hard to say that this is purely a governmental function. It's also always being eroded away. It is governmental immunity. We love it, but it's something that is unfortunately slowly dying as time goes on, as they pierce it in various different ways. And how is it pierced? Well, it's pierced really when we allow it to be pierced. So here from the code again is governmental immunity is waived when injury is caused by a defective, unsafe, or dangerous condition of a public improvement. Okay, so if we have a dangerous condition that we allow and somebody gets injured, well, we've gone beyond governmental immunity. Or injury proximately caused by a negligent act or omission of an employee committed within the scope of the employment. All right, so conditions and actions, both of those can cause us to lose our governmental immunity. Let's talk a little bit further. Let's talk about protections against liability. There's a code here, and I list the codes on this, on inherent risks. An inherent risk is an integral and natural part of participating in a recreational activity. If I get onto a bull that weighs 2,000 pounds in a bucking chute, and I grab a hold of the rope and nod my head and tell them to open up the bucking chute door, I'm taking a lot of responsibility on myself. There's some inherent risks to certain types of activities. And you know, it's funny, over the years, people come to me and they'll say, hey, we're considering putting in a skate park. What do you think about that? And most of the time they're surprised by my answer. I'll say, well, I don't know why you'd want to put that in, but I'm not terribly worried about liability from a skate park. Why is that? Well, there are inherent risks. If you put wheels under your feet on a vertical concrete surface, there's a pretty good expectation you're going to be injured. In all of my years at the trust, I don't believe I've seen a skate park claim. Now, I've seen a lot of claims about a lot of other things, but because of the inherent risk of this activity, we have a fairly good protection for certain types of things. Now, if I allow my skate park to fall into disrepair, I've got big cracks out there, or vandals have damaged the equipment and somebody gets injured because of that, well, that may change the calculus and make it to the point where somebody suing me could succeed. Okay, next step. So avoiding losses, not lawsuits. We realize that we can be sued for anything at any time. And that's unfortunate. And it ends up costing all of us a lot of money because people will make frivolous lawsuits from time to time. And unfortunately, that's a cost of doing business and being a governmental entities in these days, is we're going to get sued for some things. But how do we avoid losses? We need to be reasonable and prudent, and we need to be able to prove it. All right, so let's talk about some risk management. You guys are like, hey, we're supposed to be talking about waivers, and we're getting there. Let's talk about tools that we can use to manage risk. Here's a list of these tools, and we'll go through each one. Risk retention is basically, I'm taking it on me. If I do nothing to manage my risk, I own everything, right? If we go out and we do these activities and I do nothing to protect myself, like buy insurance, like transferring risk to others, like preventing incidents or dealing with hazards that are out there, I own it. And I own I will pay the reaper of whatever happens if something bad happens in my operation there. Okay. The next step that we use is called risk avoidance. And this is basically, we make a conscious decision that this is too risky for me. I'm not going to do this. It may be something like explosives, right? I'm not going to participate in using explosives. Well, it's not very fun, but we protected ourselves from that risk. We just make a decision. There are certain things that a local government agency just shouldn't do. And if you're in a meeting and somebody proposes a special event or whatever it may be that's over the edge, let's take the moment to say, whoa, let's discuss this. There are some things that we just shouldn't do. And we're potentially being negligent by taking on things that are beyond what we have the ability, or that is just over the top when it comes to risk. All right, so risk avoidance. Are you going to put one of these out at your fairgrounds? Oh boy, I can see some lawsuits coming from that, but it'd be a fun Friday night. Risk transference is a major tool that we use. Insurance can be risk transference, right? We purchase a policy that gives us protection against certain types of liability, and we transfer that risk by transferring money. We'll give the trust a premium with the assurance that they'll pay for this type of risk that we're taking on. Other transference that we practice is something that we need to be actively engaged in. Who owns whatever it is that we're doing? If we bring a contractor in to work for us, who owns the liability for what they're doing? If they light our building on fire or they damage something in the community, who's responsible for that? We hired them. And so contractual risk transference is an essential part of any business deal, any organization that we're involved with. If we can let somebody else own the risk, that's far better, right? We distance ourselves. So we execute contracts that allows us to transfer the risk to somebody else. How do we do that? We do that through indemnification agreements. So there's certain language that transfers that risk from one organization to the other. Another tool that we use involves certificates of insurance. You have an organization that is coming to do something on your facilities, and we say that's fine, you can do that, but you need to provide us with a certificate of insurance naming us, our organization, as an additional insured on your policy. They'll provide you that certificate, and that gives us cover for whatever happens from that activity or whatever it is that they're doing, the contractor or the event organizer or promoter. We put those things in place. These are essential tools, and they're important. What's really important with this? Well, language is important, coverage is important. So when you start doing this kind of transfer, having somebody, generally your legal counsel, take a look at contracts. Does this really cover what we think it does? Looking at coverage. If somebody gives you a certificate of insurance, but it doesn't cover the type of thing that you're having them, or that they're doing, that doesn't do us a lot of good. And so we have to carefully review the types of coverage that is out there. Yeah, here's a certificate of insurance for general liability, but that policy specifically excludes the type of thing that you're talking about. Well, that can be a real problem, and you don't have the cover. So this is something that we have to be actively engaged in, managing our risks when we've got these types of things happening out there. Okay, now we can talk about waivers. Are liability waivers a form of risk transference? The short answer is maybe. They might be something that we can transfer some risks. There are certain cases where it is important. Now, contractual risk transference is something a little bit different than this, and it's a recognized way of transferring risk. Waivers are a little less formal when it comes to that. In many cases, a liability waiver can be cut through like it's made of air. We've seen that in many court cases where these waivers just do not stand up at all. Some cases they can be beneficial, but in most cases they're very limited in their effectiveness. And Utah courts and courts around the country have really spoken on this subject. The Utah Supreme Court has, and it says, the Utah court has unambiguously held that pre-injury parental waivers for negligence violate public policy. So when we talk about waivers and minors, this is the language in a fairly recent court case. Says it would violate public policy to allow a parent to release a minor's prospective claim for negligence. There are multiple cases that have cited this same type of language here. One of them as recent as 2019, and these were involving ski resorts for the most part. But it basically says that a parent cannot sign away their child's rights when it comes to negligence. So there's a real challenge that we have with waivers, and in many cases this is the area where we use waivers a lot when minors are involved. Okay, so how about waivers for everyone? In an important case that happened just this year, it says it has therefore been declared to be good doctrine that no person may contract against his own negligence. Okay, allowing a party to contract against his own negligence tends to encourage carelessness and would not be salutary either for the person seeking to protect himself or for those whose safety may be hazarded by his conduct. Okay, that was an older case back to 66. And then we have a recent one that happened, Cunningham versus Weber County, that says we have further asserted that parties entering into contracts should be able to assume that the other intends to conduct himself as a reasonable and prudent person would under whatever circumstances may thereafter arise, which presupposes that he will commit no wrongful act nor be guilty of negligence. Oh, okay. So to finish this out, although we respect the ability of two parties bargaining at arm's length to agree that one party may waive its ability to sue for injuries arising out of others' negligence before any injury is suffered, such arrangements are unenforceable unless they are clear and unmistakable about both parties' intentions. Okay, so the requirement is really clear, and this was a 2022 Utah Supreme Court case, Cunningham v. Weber County, that said it needs to be clear and unmistakable, or a waiver is unenforceable. So are waivers worthless? No. Are they really valuable? No. They provide us limited protection. They provide us psychological risk transfer. Good people will, in this picture, here's my little girl. She's 19 and she's off on her own now. But we signed on the dotted line and said, you know what, she can go mutton busting, and she won, grand champion. She put herself at risk, and we put her at risk as a participant there. Psychologically, when we signed that piece of paper that said, yep, she can participate here. I know it says here she might die, but hey, she might win a trophy. Psychologically, for some people, when they sign a waiver, that transfers the risk. The problem comes when significant injury happens or death occurs. Everything goes out the window in those cases, and it goes to a court, and waivers are limited in their successfulness in courts. It is something. So am I telling you to not use waivers? No, that's not what I'm doing. But I do want you to realize that they are limited in their effectiveness. And so we can't just plan that, oh, we're protected. What they signed a waiver, we're good. There is one little exception in there. There's a little caveat in state law about equestrian or cattle operations, basically rodeo, that if we will follow the exactly what the state code says on this, then we have much more protection when it comes to equine or rodeo type operations. There's also a requirement in there for signage, appropriate signage at our equestrian facilities, to give us a level of protection there. That's one area where there's been better success in protecting us. But when it comes to soccer or road races, fun runs, or those types of things, these waivers have been limited in their effectiveness. Okay, so what do we do? I'm not telling you to not use waivers. They can be helpful in certain ways, but know that their value is limited and act accordingly. If you decide to use waivers, they need to be very specific to the type of activities that we're dealing with. They need to be clearly written. Going back some years, there was a case where a ski resort in the state of Utah lost a case because they had printed out their liability waiver on their ski ticket, just this little small ticket. And the court, whichever court it was, said, you couldn't even read it. It was too small. You're not going to transfer risk with something that you can't reasonably be able to read. So make sure that we are very specific and they're clearly written. What do I mean by that? They need to be specific to the activity that we're dealing with, and they should be either drafted or reviewed by our legal counsel to ensure that we've covered that. For that reason, we don't hand out a sample liability waiver because they need to be so specific. Remember, going back to what it said in the court, they have to be clear. And so make sure you're working on these things with your legal counsel to ensure that you have a document that really expresses the type of risk that we're dealing with and clearly conveys that to the other person participating in it. If we just go online and say, oh, there's a liability waiver, and grab some language and print it out, there's a good chance that it's not going to stand up to any sort of criticism. How do we protect ourselves from liability? Because if a waiver isn't going to work, we've got to be doing something else. Well, my charge to you is be intentional. Go out there and be a risk manager. Take this subject and own it. And if you're the boss and you got a lot of stuff to do out there, you need to empower somebody in your organization to be able to handle this. We've got to have risk managers, and each of us need to be risk managers. So identify what your risks are. Explosives. Well, we don't want to do that. Well, we're going to make a conscious decision that we're not going to deal with explosives. Remember, there are some things that local government agencies just shouldn't do. If you have questions about these things, give us a call. We'd love to discuss those types of things. If you have questions about contractual risk transfer between organizations, we'd love to help you with those things. Always reach out to your legal counsel on this type of stuff. Eliminate those unacceptable risks. We don't want to do explosives. We don't want to do some of those dumb things. Transfer the risk wherever possible. So use your legal counsel to draft up contracts, indemnification agreements, contractual risk transfer, and also certificates insurance. Make sure it covers the risk. Make sure we have adequate limits for the type of risk that we're dealing with. Make sure you at least cover statutory limits when it comes to that as well. And then plan for all risks. Look at those things like special events and other activities that may be there. Be aware of the type of coverage that you have. There are certain things that are exempted or exclusions from almost any insurance policy out there. You have to buy specific coverage or a rider for every for those types of activities. So things like aircraft and rebound devices, those types of things, we have to be aware of what's available in our policy and if we actually have coverage for that. And then if somebody's bringing that type of activity to our operation, we've got to have adequate coverage there. Build a risk plan. What is it that we do out here? How do we decide what's acceptable risk and what isn't? And then go forward, inspect your facilities. I know this has been a constant recurring theme that we've had throughout the last just 15 years, but specifically in the last year, we talked a lot about inspections. We've got to get out and look at our facilities, and we talk about negligence. Negligence is not inspecting our facilities and allowing an unsafe condition to eventually hurt somebody. So we've got to get out there, and when we identify it, fix it, and document what we did. Document our activities so we can be seen as reasonable and prudent. If we ever get to a court, that's where we want to be, is reasonable and prudent in our operations. Now, and just one more thing, get some cameras. They can definitely save our bacon, or they can fry our fannies if we're not doing things right. But we've seen a number of situations where by having good video footage of whether it's parks or on our transit buses or whatever it may be, cameras have helped save us and show that we've been reasonable and prudent, and we've done the right thing, and we've been able to prove that through you providing that footage. Okay, so just to wrap up, plan for success. Know what your risks are. Inspect those things. Look around. Fix any problems that you find. Document, document, document. If it isn't written down, it never happened. And so make sure that we put ourselves in a position to be able to defend ourselves. Our liability waivers, a defense, they're a tool. They're not a great tool, but they are something that we can have in our quiver as we go forward. All right, I said a lot of stuff. If you got any questions or comments, type those into the chat box and we'll answer those right now. Mike, what do we got?
We had a question on the actual code reference for the exception for rodeos. And Dayton Hall was very helpful and got that code before I could.
Yeah.
Quicker on the draw there, and Jeff Rowley, our claims manager, also put it there in the chat.
Sorry, I should have put that one up there. 78B-4-201-203. Utah Code Annotated 1953. But awesome. Okay, anything else?
That's all we've got so far. No other questions. So if you guys have some questions, let's try and stump the Jason or stump the Jeff.
Yeah, we'll try to wrap it up as soon as we can, so I don't get stumped here. But if Jeff's on, that's good. Jeff, have you made Jeff a co-host? I don't know if he has anything.
No, I can't as a co-host.
Oh, you can't. Hold on 1 second. Let me.
We do have a question. Do you have a couple of questions? What are the risk requirements for parades?
Oh, yeah, great question. Let me try to pull Jeff up here. Is Jeff listed as Jeff Rowley, or does he have a different name?
Yeah, he's Jeff Rowley.
There he is. Okay. I'm just going to make him a co-host in case he wants to chime in. Okay, what on parades? Great question, and it's definitely one that we're concerned about because we put ourselves at a lot of risk. Now, there is no ANSI standard or code out there that says this is exactly how a parade needs to be run. However, we do have some standards of practice that just make a parade safer. Number one, and when I put this up on the YouTube channel, I'll put a link in there. If you go to our YouTube channel and just go to the Trust YouTube channel, there's a little search bar. You can search in there for special events. And I have a webinar recording on that where I went into great detail on parades. So there'll be more information there. But just to look at parades, number one, we need to be very firm in our rules. We need to set rules in our parades and be firm with those. If people don't want to live by the rules, they don't have to participate in our parades. And so some basic things. We can't make sure everybody's parade is 100% safe, but we can set some rules around those. Don't have people. If you have a truck pulling a trailer, do not have people in the truck. Do not allow people on a truck or in the bed of the truck, because what happens over time is people want to jump in between and they go back and forth across the tongue of the trailer and they fall off and they get squished. If we can, and another important rule is to have anytime candy is distributed, do not throw candy from the floats. Have walkers throw the candy and have them along the edges of the perimeter. What that does is that has a tendency to keep the kids back. And if a piece of candy errantly goes under a float, kids are not going to be running out there. So if we got people handing or distributing candy along the edges, that's going to be safer there.
Not to mention saltwater taffy in the eye doesn't go.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And also, think carefully about allowing animals in stock in your parades. I'm not saying don't do it, but if I've got the fire department, they're running the siren on the ambulance or the fire engine right next to the mounted posse or whatever animal group that we've got riding horses or other animals. That might be a recipe for disaster. So let's be really smart about those things. I've got some, they're not popping into my head, but I've already gone long here. Anyway, we'll link to that other special events webinar where we go into gory detail on parades. But great question, and one we're concerned about. Jeff, did you have anything to add?
Jason, while we're waiting for him, we've got a couple more questions.
Oh, okay.
Can we send over drafts of waivers for the trust to review?
You know, what I would say on that, we're happy to take a look at those, but at the end of the day, it's your legal counsel that's going to give you the guidance that you need for that. The reason is the trust, you know, we may not understand your operation like you do. And, you know, we can definitely give you some guidelines, which is basically what we've talked about today. But your relationship with your legal counsel is really important when it comes to getting those right. You said we had another one?
Yeah, one more. For recreation, would you suggest making a different waiver for each sport? Or could one waiver cover all sports as a city or an organization runs? And
I'll go back to that. I default I default to those attorneys on that, but that's also a conversation that we should have with our legal counsel on that. I wouldn't preclude being able to have a waiver that would cover, you know, is football different than soccer? I don't know, but probably there would be something that you could cover multiple sports with a similar with the same waiver, realizing that it's limited in its effectiveness anyway. But the challenge that I look at is when we use one waiver and it covers everything. And that's where I think we really get ourselves into trouble. So yeah, I think there's potential there. Talk to your attorney and say, where do we stand on this? And if your attorney says, you know, I'm not very good on these things, or they look confused when you ask them about this, then you may hire somebody else to work with these types of situations and contracts. Not every attorney is adept at every part of law, and so really know where you stand out on that. And that's not a diss to attorneys. It's just saying that some people do some things and other people do others.
Right.
Did Jeff ever figure out his unmute button?
I don't know. I can unmute. I can unmute him. Ask him to unmute.
He's probably on the phone.
Thank you. Actually, Jason, I think you unmuted somebody else or made somebody else host.
You made Garen a co-host. Yeah. Garen Breck's now a co-host. Congratulations, Garen.
I hit the wrong person. I'm sorry.
So I would just, I put in the chat too, there's a different section 78B for 509 specifically for rodeos and recreation, certain other recreational activities that is very specific about immunity for you. I wanted to comment on the parades. Another thing to make sure you add is that you make it clear to participants who's a volunteer for your organization in writing and who is just there participating. And if they're just participating, that you know, make sure they understand they own their risk and not you. And then finally, with regard to waivers, they are not a panacea, but they are a tool that I think should continue to be used broadly, if not for anything else, but to inform people that there are risks involved in these things. I think in the state of Utah, we've enjoyed a period of time where people took a lot of ownership for things. Hey, I messed up, or that was my child and I knew they were at risk, so I'm not going to take any action against somebody else because they got hurt at a park or playing soccer or whatever it may be. I think that's changing in a lot of the state of Utah with the influx of people moving in. And so we still need to use it. It's a great tool to inform people of their risks. And in some cases, more formal waiver does protect you. But that doesn't really work very well when you're talking about youth activities and short-term or temporary events. So continue to use them, but just recognize, as Jason said, they're limited use as far as legally.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And for those of you, I'm sure most of you on here know Jeff, but Jeff is our claims manager here, and he deals with this stuff day in, day out. He understands just how these things work. And so if you have specific questions, we're more than happy to help you out. Jeff's here. If you have coverage questions, you have your risk finance pros that are able to go out and help you on appropriate coverage and certificates of insurance and all of those things. We want to help you be successful in your risk management efforts. And so please don't hesitate to give us a call. All right, Mike, we got everything cleared out?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, folks. We appreciate your time and attention today. Please give us a call if you have questions, need some assistance on whatever it is. We're happy to help. Go out and have a safe day.
Thanks, everyone.